Hello, everyone, and thank you for viewing our Psych Bite, Addiction and Bipolar, Learning to Sparkle in Hard Times. In this video, we'll be talking with Patrick Roland. In 2014, Patrick lost his partner, Pac, suddenly and without warning. And in tremendous emotional pain and feeling lonely and depressed, he started using recreational drugs to cope with what he was going through. He hit rock bottom while on a trip to Las Vegas, and it was during that trip that he met with his bipolar diagnosis. After being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and then getting sober, Patrick started his new journey with a founded strength to face obstacles that were still yet to come. He's authored 3 books about his experience, including a children's book. He currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona, where he's a peer support counselor at a mental health clinic. He has the privileges of helping people just like himself. He's also working towards his master's degree in addiction and counseling. So welcome, Patrick. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'd like to start off by having you share just a little bit about the part of your journey that led you to start using drugs.
So, what happened was about 10 years ago, I had a really high profile job at a magazine here in Phoenix. It was very high profile. In that role, I was the editor. And so I interviewed like a lot of celebrities. I got to go to, fancy parties. I knew the mayor of Phoenix. If I wanted to have a nice table at a restaurant on a Friday night, I could call and get a table. I was that guy. But at the same time, for whatever reason, I was dating a guy that abused me, and physically and emotionally. And as a result of that abuse, I didn't have very much self-esteem. And even though I had all these things happening around me, I didn't have anything going on really on the inside. And so what ended up happening is this abuse kind of spirals out of control. And because of the abuse, I kind of spiral out of control. And what ends up happening is I lose that job. And so I lose this job, which is like my identity. And I'm still in this abusive relationship. And that goes on for, that relationship went on for a couple years. And what happened in that relationship is I started lying a lot because people knew he was abusing me because I talked about it. But I wasn't honest about the fact that I was still seeing him. So I start lying a lot. And I've never been a liar. I'd always kind of been a really good kid. And I started lying a lot, and I started getting away with it. And I started kind of maybe feeling like bigger than I was. So that relationship goes on for about a year longer than people think it is. And then all of a sudden the relationship ends, and I'm living in my parents' basement, and I'm still unemployed. Like I was unemployed I would get jobs here and there, but I couldn't connect anything at that point. I was probably pretty symptomatic too. I would say I was very depressed and kind of all over the place. So for that 2-year period, I can't really connect anything together. And what ends up happening is my self-esteem is so low that I decide maybe I should start to do drugs because that's what somebody like me should do. That was my thought process. But I didn't know how to do drugs because I grew up on a country club. I actually still live there. And, I'm a goodie. I went to a private Catholic boys high school. I wear polo shirts. I got good grades. Like, I don't know how to do drugs. So I put up an ad on Craigslist, and I literally say, I'm looking for someone to teach me how to do drugs. And I meet this man who has always been curious about guys, but has never really been with guys. And we start this relationship that I didn't think was going to be a relationship. It was just, I thought I was looking for somebody to teach me how to do drugs. And what ends up happening is as he's teaching me, I'm also starting to fall in love with him. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that for many people, hard life circumstances lead them to seeking out their relief by drug use. So thank you for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about how you came to learn that you had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I know you shared with me earlier that you were on a trip, right, to Vegas, and can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a long journey on the way to that trip to Vegas. Unfortunately, in January of 2014, So 3 years go by in between me meeting him and that behavior starting, and then it's 2014. We're living together. Everything's, on the surface, everything seems really good, but I find him dead in our house one morning. And as I had mentioned before, he had never been with a guy before, so he was still closeted, and he had never told anyone about me in his family. So, and he was estranged from his family, but this was before gay marriage was legal. So what happened was, about an hour after I found him dead, the Phoenix police asked me to leave my own home because his family, who I had never met, had more rights in our home. And so what ends up happening is these people want nothing to do with me. They're allowed to come in our home and take whatever they want out of it, including things that were mine. They are allowed to decide that I can't live there anymore. They are allowed to decide that I can't go to his funeral. Wow. And so what ends up happening is I unravel. Remember, I was looking for someone to teach me how to do drugs, and he had done a good job. And the thing that's different, though, in this scenario is he was very protective of me. And so when he was alive, I never went off the deep end. I did know at a certain point when we were using together that the drugs didn't do right by me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I did not, he recovered and I did not. I was up and down and up and down and up and down, and I felt sick and I didn't feel right. And actually about 6 months before he died, I tried to go to rehab because I thought that if I stopped, he would stop and we would stop and maybe things would be different. And the problem with that is you cannot quit for someone else. You have to do it for yourself.
Absolutely.
He didn't want to quit. So even though he was supportive and stuff of me, that was kind of what our relationship was built around. It was this really weird dynamic of Monday through Friday, we go to work every day. He makes me dinner every night. He gets down on his knee and kisses me on the forehead and says, "Good night, I love you." Very sweet, loving guy. And then on the weekend, it's like party time. And so, but then we put it away, right? On Saturday afternoon or at some point, everything gets put away and I go back to work, right? Yeah. Well, guess what? He's not there to stop me, and I'm grieving, and I don't go to his funeral, and I don't ever deal with that grief except to do drugs. So what ends up happening is I spend about the next year and a half doing more and more and more drugs, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I was also turning 40 around that time, and turning 40 in my gay headspace was I don't know. I guess I just always saw 40 as this really scary thing because then I was old and I wouldn't be, nobody would want me anymore. Yeah. And my partner was dead, whatever. So I just do more and more and more drugs. But then somehow I end up in Vegas. Mariah Carey was doing a residency there, and so was Britney Spears. And I think that it's a really good idea to buy tickets to see both of them for my 40th birthday. So I end up in Vegas. But by this point, I'm doing drugs every day. I'm going to work high. I'm driving high. I'm going to my dad's 75th birthday party high. Wow. I'm that guy that's just, I can't stop. And what ends up happening is I literally spend this whole weekend that I'm supposed to be celebrating my birthday, doing things to honor myself. I spend the whole time in a penthouse suite in Vegas, doing more drugs and inviting really scary guys over. And what ends up happening is I go to the Mariah Carey concert and I get very frustrated after about 6 songs. I, was high. I'd been awake for probably 3 or 4 days at that point. And anything at that point would have triggered me to leave. But honestly, the truth is I wanted to do more drugs. Yeah. And I go back to my hotel room and I realized that the window in my hotel room opens up. And I was staying at a hotel that's kind of catty corner from the strip. So I'm looking out. I'm on the 26th floor. I'm looking out and I see all this light, this sparkle, this light. And I just want to be part of the light. I want to stop hurting. So I decide that I'm going to jump into the light. That seemed like a really good idea. Before I do so, I call my mother. And I didn't know this at the time. I knew something was off about her. But my mom actually later was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so my mom, who at this point basically has Alzheimer's, somehow finds me in Las Vegas and calls the police. And
Wow.
When you threaten to jump out of a 26-story window in Vegas, just about everybody in town comes. So there's like paramedics, firemen, I don't know, like everybody, police. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get arrested because I had drugs and drug paraphernalia in my room. And what ends up happening, though, is they put me in the hospital. And, you know, against my will on a 5150, 72-hour. I like to say that I got Britney Spears when I went to go see Britney Spears. Same thing that happened to her.
Well, I'm glad you can laugh about it now.
Right? But what ends up, so I go to this hospital, and I get diagnosed bipolar in this hospital. And I'm telling you, I have this aha moment where like the lights come on in my head, and I feel like everything that had not made sense for so many years made so much sense. Like I'm high, I'm low, I'm all over the place. And I realized that if I continue to do drugs, that it's probably going to be like that. So I realized that I have to stop doing drugs if I want to be healthy with this new diagnosis. And so something about this diagnosis triggers something inside of me that makes me start fighting for myself. And so inside this hospital, I decide to start living again. And they make us go to all these classes, right? So I have to go to gym. And I decide that even though I'm not an athlete, that I'm going to make the basket. I'm Shaquille O'Neal, right? I go to art class, and I can't draw for anything. But I decide in art class that I'm Picasso, right? And then I decide in group that I am a really good sharer and that I can be Oprah Winfrey. So the decision that I make in this hospital experience is that I can be anything that I want to be if I stay sober and I let myself, if I kind of make the decision, if you will, to honor myself and try to work for it and love myself.
That's really inspirational. I know that before when we were talking, you talked in some regards that this diagnosis really saved your life. And that sounds like what you were talking about. It was the impetus for you to choose to live as healthy as possible. So thank you for sharing that story. And I know you having a dual diagnosis of addiction and bipolar, and I'm sure that can be overwhelming at times. Can you share with us how you came to accept both of those diagnoses and then move on towards wellness? Sorry.
Okay, so, you know, it's interesting. I decided that instead of being afraid of all the things that I'd always been afraid of, I decided to lean into them. I was bullied a lot growing up. I was bullied from the age of 5 on. Obviously, that led to abusive relationships, which led to drugs, which everything like leads to something else, basically.
Right.
And I decided to stop the process. I decided to stop that kind of snowball, and I decided to figure out what was causing it. And so what ends up happening is, like, there are several things that are happening, right? I'm grieving because he's been dead for 1.5 years, and I've never dealt with that in any way because I'm high the whole time. I am bipolar, and I need to figure out how to deal with that. And I'm a drug addict too. And what ends up happening is I had found this grief counselor. It's so weird. Like, I had met her like a week before I went to Vegas, and I sat in front of her and I said, you know what? I really want counseling, but I'm not going to stop doing drugs. I'm not going to stop drinking. That's who I am. If you don't like it, suck it. Basically, I just have a lot of attitude.
Well, that's where you were at the time. That was functioning, and
And she looked at me, and I swear to God, all she said was, mm-hmm. It's like she knew, like, in her head that, like, something was going to happen. So I get back from Vegas, and I have had this experience. And she goes, oh, so a 2x4 hit you. And I'm telling you, I believe that something spiritual happened to me in Vegas that made me realize that I couldn't live my life like that. So she agrees to give me grief counseling. But the one thing that she did for me that was the best thing that she could have done for me at that time is she told me that she knew how to handle grief, but she didn't know how to handle the other stuff, the addiction and the bipolar. So I had to figure that out. So what I like to say is I had 3 issues. I had grief, I had a new diagnosis, and I had addiction. I had to bucket them, and I had to figure out how to make them work for me instead of against me. So I did the grief with her. She made me promise that I would go to a 12-step meeting. And so I started doing that. I went to 1. She told me I had to go to 1. What ends up happening there is 1 becomes 2, and then 3, and so on. and I'm immersed in this community, and the other stuff kind of stops being not as unmanageable. Also, I go to a doctor and I get put on medication. Well, I got put on medication in Vegas, I should say, but I actually start taking my medication instead of doing drugs. And that really helps. Imagine that.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is I find this home in recovery that I never had before, and I find these friends that feel more like family than anything. And so all these problems that I had that I was using over, Pac being dead, my mom being sick, my dad is also very sick. I felt like I was losing my family. I felt like I was all alone. I'll never forget in that hallway in Vegas, a paramedic said to me, "How can you help anybody else if you can't take care of yourself?" And that really, I think that triggered this movement of, I got to help myself because I really want to help other people. And I started to believe that I had this story that could really maybe inspire and motivate and help other people. But at first I had to get it right within myself.
That was a great question. And he's absolutely right. You can't help anyone if you're not well.
Yeah.
And I think people sometimes don't understand or realize how powerful grief is and how you really do need help in resolving that. So in addition to your addiction, your new diagnosis of bipolar, you're also having to go back and grieve. So
right, it's like I'm stripping layers and layers and layers, and I'm getting to the root of patterns and behaviors and causes, and as I've stayed sober, that window in Vegas was a little over 4 years ago. I've been sober every day since then, and I do not allow myself to stay stuck. If I'm having trouble, I lean into it and I push forward. That's a coping skill that works for me. I can't speak to everyone if that's going to work for them, but for me, I know that if I'm having an internal struggle, I know that it's a spiritual issue. Carl Jung said every psychological issue is an issue of spirituality. So I have to lean into it and
figure it out,
embrace it, and figure it out, and figure out why it's happening. And I've done my steps now 4 different times, and each time I have a new experience, and each time I become more of who I really am. I think that writing books has been a really good outlet for me, because the first book was about that death and all the things that I experienced with that family and Vegas and getting sober, and getting all that out of me really set myself free in a way. And so then I write this really nice, light children's book about bullying, right? Because I'm getting that out of me. And then I write this new book where I'm this strong person that faces adversity, and just things keep getting thrown at me. And I don't have to do drugs this time, and I don't have to decompensate. I can solve these problems by asking for help, or writing it out, or going to a meeting, or helping someone else. The main thing that really keeps me sober is helping other people. But it's because I can take care of myself that I'm able to do that.
Yeah,
and
that's fantastic. I was going to ask you if you could share some of your tools and strategies that you developed over the years. And congratulations on 4 years of sobriety. That's fantastic.
Thank you. So honestly, I have a couple major coping skills. One is that I talk about things. I talk about things until I can't stop talking about them. And sometimes I still have to talk about them. Maybe I sound like a broken record, but I talk things out. I don't let things stay inside me. I don't isolate anymore. I have a large group of friends, and when things get too overwhelming for me, I pivot and I go to the next place. I just won't allow myself to stay in a bad place. I find my way. I crawl out of it if I have to. Sometimes it feels like I'm crawling over broken glass and there's fire all around me. But I am determined to get to the next step in my progression. I just won't allow it. Another thing that's really important that I've realized as I work in this mental health clinic, that energy can be very draining. Also, my parents are sick, and I am their power of attorney, so I take care of them in many ways. I have to do a lot of self-care, because if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of other people.
Right.
So I have to do a lot of self-care. I have to take my medicine, which I do. I have to go to meetings. I have to do a lot of service work in the fellowship. I have to sponsor other men. So this cool thing about sobriety is we get to sponsor other people, and these things that we thought broke us are actually things that we get to help someone else work through. It also happens to me at work all the time. I literally have walked people through scenarios that once really hurt me, but I can help them now because I experienced it and I know what to do, right? One of the very first people I helped had been kicked out of her house and she didn't know what to do, and her stuff was in the house, and I knew what to do because I had been through that.
You had been in that position before.
If you would have told me that would have happened to me when all that stuff was happening and I couldn't get over it, I would have told you, I'm never going to get over this. But the thing is that everything that happens to us, it doesn't happen to us, it happens for us. So I was meant to have every experience that I had, because right now in this moment, something maybe that I'm going to say is going to help someone else out there deal with something that they're going through.
Right, absolutely. It really does take a village for all of us.
Yeah.
Through this life. Can you share with us how you're doing now and what some of your greatest challenges in managing your bipolar and keeping your sobriety have been?
So I would say that I'm thriving. I feel, I had this. So when that whole thing with PAC and the window in Vegas and the bipolar diagnosis, I had this really super corporate job that I hated, but I had been there for a long time and I was really scared to leave it, and I made a lot of money. And again, I get this great sponsor that tells me that if I have enough faith to take the invisible staircase, something better is going to happen for me, right? Like, I know what's behind door number 1 doesn't really make me happy anymore, but if I have enough faith to try to choose door number 2, something better might happen. And so what ends up happening is I do finally leave that job and I get my peer support certification, and it takes me a while to find a job, but because it took me a while to find a job, I end up enrolling in grad school. And I had never imagined that I would enroll in grad school, right? And so I'm enrolled in grad school, and then I get this job as a peer support. That was a year ago. And so on Monday, so one of the reasons why I left that job is because I had been there 7 years and they wouldn't advance me. I couldn't get anywhere. I felt stuck. On Monday, I start my new job as a case manager because in a year, I did what I couldn't do in 7 at that last place. I got promoted. And, people like me who are bipolar and a drug addict and a widow and gay and all the things that I am, in my head, like years ago, that would never happen to me. But that's what happened to me. So I don't know. Something's working. I do take my meds. I do go to the doctor regularly and take my medication as prescribed. And I go to meetings quite a bit still, even though I have 4 years. I've got my feet planted solidly in the ground where the root took over, right? And so because I let that happen, I'm growing like a flower every day.
Yeah, you're blooming and blossoming.
I'm blooming and blossoming because I know what I need, and I need to stay where I'm at. And where I'm at is working for me. I'm not saying I don't get super stressed out. Like, okay, here's something that's going on right now. Like, my dad has finally gotten to the point where he can't drive anymore. He's got Parkinson's. And because I have to make those decisions for him, I had to basically get his license taken away from him. And that's a super struggle because he doesn't want to give up his driver's license. Who does?
Yeah.
But I think he has finally relented and he's giving up his driver's license. And I'm so scared because that means that, I don't know what it means really, but it means that he's probably going to need more help doing things. And I don't have a lot of time in my life to do a lot of extra stuff, but I'm going to have to figure it out because I'm the one that's there. And so what that means is probably going to have to be doing more grocery shopping and driving him around. And I've got this promotion coming up, and that can be very overwhelming, right? Bipolar, for me, the main thing is how ahead of myself I get. And so what I have to do, what really works for me, is I meditate a lot. I meditate a lot because it keeps me in the moment, and I pray a lot. Like, I have a very strong foundation in spirituality now that gets me through things that I didn't think that I could get through. I'm not saying I don't get overwhelmed. I'm not saying that I don't call people crying. I call my sponsor crying a lot. But again, I have those supports in place to help me get through it. And I know that no matter what I do, I'm not alone in it.
Yeah, that's powerful, is not being alone and finding that support team. And I just appreciate so much you sharing your story of being vulnerable. I know that that's personal. That's who you are. The story, quite frankly, could have ended much differently. So I'm encouraged to hear the way that you took it by the horns and really went after it to make a difference. I think that's inspiring. It's going to help so many people. Is there any message that you'd like to share before we go with people who are living with a dual diagnosis of both drug addiction and bipolar disorder?
I do. What I see every day at the clinic in particular is I see people that maybe don't feel like they can or don't feel like they're worth it or feel like maybe nothing has ever worked out for me, so why is it going to work out this time? And I totally understand that because that's the space I lived in for 40 years. Yes. And I'm 44 now, and I've been sober for 4 years, and I'm still bipolar. I'm still a widow. I'm still gay. I still was abused. I still am all those things. But the thing is that I found me in that process. And even if you're scared, like the thing is that on the other side of fear is where the miracle is. And I think that if you're living with a dual diagnosis like addiction and mental illness, I think there's probably a lot of fear and probably a lot of doubt and a lack of hope. But I'm here to tell you that there's always hope. There's always a chance for tomorrow. You can always change your life. You just have to believe that you can. You just have to love yourself enough to know that there is something better for you, and that all you have to do is make the decision to lean into it, embrace it, and own it. Because really the only reason why I'm sitting here where I'm sitting is because I own everything that I am. I stopped being afraid of it. And I'm living the miracle on the other side of that fear.
Yes, you are. And I think you're right. Fear is such a powerful negative force in our lives. So thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that as people listen, they'll find some hope and some strength and some encouragement by it. So tell us again, before we go, tell us again the name of your books in case people want to grab those for more information.
Isn't that funny how that worked out? So the first one is called Unpack Sparkle. This is about my journey into sobriety. The second one is my children's book. It's called Sparkle On. It's about bullying because I feel like maybe if kids have good self-esteem and good self-love when they're young, maybe they won't let people bully them, or maybe they'll make different decisions. I don't know. And then the newest one that just came out a few months ago is called The Sparkle King. So people started calling me the Sparkle King in sobriety, like I'm this guy that used to try to end his life all the time and was miserable, and people call me the Sparkle King. And so what this book is about, this book is really about finding who you are, loving who you are, embracing who you are, and owning who you are. And I'm not saying that bad things don't happen to me, because life is life, and life can be really hard.
It can get messy for sure.
It can get so messy. I'm just saying that it's actually pretty beautiful. And if you learn from all the pain, that's where the power is. So I'm not saying that there isn't pain, but what I am saying is there's even more power if you get through it and decide to embrace it and own it.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, again, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate you taking the time with us, and continue to live well.
Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody else does too.